But I do have a favour to ask of our committee members and owners generally, and that is please be kind to your strata manager this month. Let's make that a theme. The world does not end. That's a statement, right? Please don't expect in the next 20 days. Quotes, contractors are already booked out and they are not taking on any work. So please don't think that your strata manager is magically going to be able to make one of these people do something. Work to be performed unless it's already booked in. And just like toys, if you didn't put your order in on the 1st of October, it ain't happening before Christmas. Committee meetings, unless they were already booked, it's unfair, you know, in this last 20 days to be expecting your strata manager to drop everything, rearrange, you know, family considerations and everything else to fit in with committee meetings that weren't booked in. And otherwise just generally response to non-urgent matters and phone calls, because at this time of the year, your strata manager is having to prioritise work to obviously assist and help people with urgent and necessary work that's got to be done, put in place after-hours arrangements to ensure you're well looked after, do all the comms to people to let them know what that all means, and also take leave for themselves and arrange and cover, you know, holiday staff for the people who are going on leave. So just my plea, if we could just be kind to our strata managers in the next 20 days, that would be wonderful. And let's face it, you, our volunteer committee members, also need a break. So please, you know, think about that and enjoy the lead up to and include the silly season. Well, panel, today I thought we would do a wrap of the year, which is a traditional thing that a lot of organisations and commentators do, is to look at the year in review and, you know, talk about wins and losses. Etc. And, you know, we tiptoed through a number, as I said, of different sorts of topics. And I thought we'd perhaps just break it down into 3 areas for our conversation today. The first one, David, I thought you would lead, would be on our EV and solar and fire and, you know, all those things that, you know, perhaps recap some of those, you know, 3 best things to do to start on the journey, but also any updates, because the 12 months, there's been quite a bit happening in the space, and I'm sure there's stuff that you can take us through. The second topic I thought we would perhaps touch on in particular is a favourite of both Catherine and Nick's. And but I was leading with Catherine because of her newly appointed position of being a councillor at the City of Perth and the parallels between the 3rd tier and the 4th tier of government, and any modelling, you know, experiences that we could learn from that. And then Nick, really to finish up, and always that position of wrapping up, the good practices, practical tips for better and continued governance for our committee. So that was sort of how I thought we might roll out today, and just as usual, I'm sure we'll fill the session with lots of conversations. But so David, I'm going to throw to you first. What's been happening in our space, and is there any good news for our listeners?
Well, thanks, Julie. Well, on the exciting front of EVs, 2023 has been quite a watershed year in a number of regards. Firstly, we've had a massive increase in the numbers of models of EVs, so they're no longer just a few models and very expensive, but we're now seeing a much greater range of cars and price points available in the Australian market. And that is only going to get better, I believe, in 2024, particularly when some of the wider dynamics about EV manufacturing and the role of China as a source of EVs across the world plays out. So I think you'll see people being able to make an easier choice when they go to refresh their car. And I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that relates to that. That is, in the first 6 months of the year, we hit in Australia probably a critical tipping point in passenger vehicle sales. For the first time, EVs were 7% of the new vehicle sales, which is quite a dramatic uplift in the sales numbers. And that reflected the arrival of one particular manufacturer, BYD, but also the popularity of Tesla's Model Y, sort of a quasi SUV vehicle. And we will see next year more SUV type vehicles, which Australians like to buy, hit the market. And we'll see them both as plug-in hybrids and as battery electric vehicles. So I think 2024 is going to see many more cars in car parks of Strata buildings. That's the first thing. The second thing is that in 2023, the subject of fire was kept coming alive, and a
burning issue.
Well, in some people's minds, it became a burning issue. It definitely has been used to sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt, with very little justification. We've seen the social media working overtime, disinformation working overtime, whether that disinformation comes from so-called experts in fire or even non-experts. But what did occur in 2023, which is really vital, is that the Australian Building Code Board published in mid-year a definitive statement about, as an advisory note, on safety for EV charging in strata buildings, which is was a critical and a watershed moment, because if you follow that guideline, it puts to bed lots of the arguments that are raised by the sowers of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That was based on some very good research from EV FireSafe and Emma Sutcliffe, and some of her work now starting to be taken up by insurers, because in Strata, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt got thrown around. Oh, insurers won't insure buildings that have got EVs in them. Wrong. That is just a bold statement, a statement which is 100% wrong. Insurers do insure buildings with EVs. In fact, insurers have been saying you should do all these really good things that now the ABCB has been saying you should do. So follow those, follow the sort of practices that we've spelled out on here, how to retrofit a building, and then that manages the potential risks. One of the things that came out of all of that work was how electric vehicles have, the internal combustion engine vehicles catch fire every day, but we never hear about them. We hear about an electric vehicle catching fire, and there's now some really good stats coming out. I was recently, whether it's from New South Wales Fire Service or from Sweden, the number of fires in internal combustion engines as of any metric of how you measure it is substantially higher than having an EV. In fact, you would reduce the risk of fire in your building if you had a 100% EV fleet. So I think but associated with that has been the rise of personal mobility devices, e-scooters and e-bikes. They do pose a risk because the quality of manufacturing, the quality of the battery management systems, the quality of the batteries, and how people use and abuse them raises the risk of fire associated with those vehicles quite considerably. We don't have a solution to how to solve that problem, other than education. And I think the final thing I would say, which was quite exciting, is that New South Wales and the ACT have decided to use, this is the New South Wales and ACT governments are now running sort of some programs to provide exemplars of how to go about retrofitting. And they're giving money to studies, they're giving money to assist owners corporations, and they want to build up a portfolio of model projects. And I think that is quite exciting because that will provide concrete examples that are easy for people to see in those states, and easy for people in other states to follow. And they've set some parameters around how they're going to give out that money. But essentially, the starting point is undertake a study, undertake a survey, do all those things that we've talked about in these podcasts, and then move into the how to and get on with the hard game of retrofitting. So that's been 2023. I think 2024 will be even have a higher pace of EV retrofitting in Strata. So thanks, Jill.
Thanks, David. That was a great summary. Is the incentive still there for purchasing EV vehicles, or is it now, given that huge uptake of, it's off and running, is it no longer incentivized?
Right. So the middle class welfare, as it's termed, to get a subsidy to buy an EV. Victoria abolished it. New South Wales is abolishing it from the 1st of January. Queensland doubled it, just to always be contrary. And so it's now $6,000 in Queensland. It's the best place to buy an EV in Australia. I think ACT still has them, but the reality was that didn't turn out to be, like most subsidies like that, they don't turn out to be a driver to change people's patterns of purchase. The reason people buy electric vehicles isn't because you could get a $3,000 subsidy.
Oh gosh, no.
The only people who benefited from the $3,000 subsidy were the vehicle importers and distributors, as occurs with most of those sort of subsidies. So I think and on that, the High Court decision about the Victorian government's road pricing levy for EVs, actually, I have mixed views about that one. I think in some ways we've lost the opportunity to revisit road pricing generally as a national policy. But the other really, I think, concerning thing which state treasurers have is that decision may have a lot of flow-on effects into other areas of state levies and revenue raising, which really we need to work our way through nationally. So that's been the macro sort of things that have occurred.
Thanks. And Catherine, have you got an EV yet?
No, my building doesn't let us charge them here yet. But as soon as I can charge, I'm driving in one. Yes,
you'll be a future case study for us to talk about. So what I wanted to bring the conversation around now is a reflection on some of the discussions that we had through the year, that in particular was around conflict of interest. And this did come out of a topic with Dr. Nicole Johnson, where we were talking about buying off the plan and the developer conflict of interest. But more recently, it also stems to a bit of media stuff that occurred during the year on buildings committees, and conflicts of interest, and sufficient enough that it was all over the news, etc. And with your appointment, as I mentioned, as a councillor, and congratulations again to the City of Perth, they would already have, I guess where I'm going is I'm thinking about the induction process that you would have experienced as coming in as a councillor. And is it a paid position or a volunteer position?
It's paid, but it's paid like a part-time position. Yep.
Yeah, so it's a small amount, but it is a paid position. And just what in particular, perceived interests, perceived conflicts of interest, which when you're in a very public facing role that you're in, that almost outweighs the actual conflict, because there will be processes, registers that you've got to fill in, you know, blah, blah, blah kind of thing. But yeah, so I just thought, I mean, you haven't been in the job long, but I wondered what that was. I mean, was the Right Act read to you? Do you know exactly where you stand? Is it something you've seen, noticed already? But anyway, over to you. Regale us with your stories.
I think governance is, you know, it's a lot of common sense, except the problem is common sense isn't common. So that's the problem. So in local government area, it's very prescriptive how you deal with conflicts of interest. So they have what they call direct financial interests, indirect financial interests, proximity interests, and then this other thing called impartiality interests, which is basically the perception interest that you're talking about. And there's very clear categories. But as it relates to strata, you know, it's quite interesting because really us owners, we all have to get good at understanding what's the common good versus is it for my good, right? And it comes down to often the pub test. If I was sitting around at the pub chatting with somebody and I said, you know, I've just got this done in my strata and it benefits me because it puts my value up or it benefits me directly somehow, that is, you know, potentially my good. But if you're talking at somebody in the pub and you're saying our whole building just got painted and everyone's value jumped up, that's the common good. So you've got to get good at distinguishing between the common good, the common interest, and your own interest. And sometimes they're aligned. Quite often they're aligned in strata, but sometimes they're not. And where we come, and it's an interesting conversation in EVs, of course, because here, especially in WA, there are people now who won't buy apartments unless it's got EV charging ready. And so there's a value discussion there about is my value increased because I've put it EV ready, but there are other people who are blocking it and therefore the whole building's value is decreasing. So there's, you know, conflicts are very complicated, but I think everybody knows what the pub test is. And I think if you just apply it, you're pretty well in safe ground.
Yeah, when we had this conversation, I had just come back from New Zealand, and there was a couple of things in there. They'd just gone through some legislative reform, and there were two things that I brought back. One was around conflicts. They have a new section in their Act, Section 114A and B, which relates to the committee and conflicts, and it defines in particular, which no other, for us, strata legislation has done, is modelling somewhat that. It only has 2 levels rather than 4 levels, but you know, that's sort of quite interesting. It's the first time to have seen that articulated like that. So I'm a bit interested in those 4 levels. Are the distinction between those 4 something that is worth pulling out? I don't know if that's a council document or legislation that has those 4 distinctions. But is there an opportunity to pull those out to make it into that practice guide to be able to hand to committees and go, this is how you can think about your, you know, managing your conflicts is by dividing them into these buckets, as you say, and I like adding the pub test at the bottom of the bucket because I think that's in the right communication. Is that
I think that can point, I think that's quite good. I think it can point to case studies. So, you know, direct financial interest, am I benefiting directly? Like if I'm going to put myself out for a contract, if I want to be the building manager in my building, that's a clear perceived financial interest. If my husband does it, that's an indirect financial interest. So if you could do, you know, you can easily do case studies and examples on that kind of thing. But I think it gets interesting in the committee area. And, you know, in WA, we have a law that states the Strata Council must act in interests of all owners. But it doesn't delineate any further than that.
No,
but exactly. You just have to get.
It is that getting it, you know, getting the nuts and bolts kind of thing, because a motherhood statement's great, but if no one understands it, it's not delivering, you know, the right outcome. So if I just cycle over to Nick for a sec, this area of governance and in particular conflict of interest is something with the numerous committees and boards that you've served on would be, again, that same kind of thing. Is it been your experience that the sort of the conflicts, Catherine's shown us that it's detailed to 4 levels, 4 buckets to sort of consider. Is that something you've seen for the sorts of boards and committees that you sit on, or is it still kept at that higher threshold of act in the best interests of?
Well, it all gets back to governance, and I agree totally with Catherine. It's common sense. As you know, Julie, I always ask 3 questions. 3 really simple, essential questions in terms of good governance. What do we need to know as committee members or lot owners? What to do, and particularly collectively, collaboratively in a community, and what to achieve. And conflicts of interest are dealt with through asking those simple questions. What to know, what to do, what to achieve. In terms of what to know, induction and training need to get better always. There should be an induction video for all new committee members. You know, even if it's really short and sharp and focused on issues, including conflicts of interest. We need an e-news circular, Julie, that provides updates about Strata and good practices that can be shared across all owners corporations, all management firms and so on, so that we really develop our own informal benchmarks. We need statewide networks to share good practices and simple things, just how committees spend time on their own induction and development, including having a quick conversation among committee members at a conclusion of a meeting. Was it a good meeting? How do we improve it? So what to know is fundamental. We need to ask it. And look, we ask these questions all the time, you know, but perhaps not explicitly, intentionally, and as often as we might. What to know, what to do, what to achieve. In terms of the what to do components or question, you know how passionate we all are, of course, about strategic plans. A community survey is always the first step. I always want to know, it doesn't matter how big or small an OC is there a focus on what community members can do and achieve together? And it begins with a survey, obviously, you know, and keep it broad, you know, like the survey should be looking at all kinds of issues and concerns and suggestions that lot owners and renters, for that matter, have to share, you know, and that's around maintenance and appearance of property, but it could be car parking, it could be flood risk management, energy efficiency, biodiversity, safety, security, whatever, doesn't matter, or links of local government. Put them into the survey so that eventually there is an action plan or a strategic plan that is co-owned by committee members, the manager, and lot owners and renters, that we're actually singing from the same song sheet. And the shared goals in a plan, you know, the best committees, they organise their meeting agendas around those goals. So if there are 4 or 5 goal areas and they're not just highfalutin, but they're practical and focused as to what we want to achieve over 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, even 5 years, if it's a bigger OC, and it includes the maintenance plan goals as well, the committee meetings should be organised around those goals. So we're not just, you know, being bureaucratic or perfunctory or hearing reports. Every decision we make, every discussion we have is actually informed by what we want to achieve. And then that's the third question, being crystal clear about what we want to achieve. You know, what do we want to achieve within our owners corporation, and not just on the committee, because governance is often conflated with the work of the committee. Well, a committee is pivotal, or the board is pivotal in governance, but governance is about how we all relate to each other. And that's lot owners, managers, and committee members, how they relate to each other and achieve things together. Governance, rooted in the old Greek origin of the word, is simply about steering a ship. You know, so how do we steer something to get from A to B, to improve what we want to develop and what we achieve together? So that's what governance is. So governance is not only the committee, it's also, of course, the broader question as to what a community, an OC community, wants to achieve together. So I'm just suggesting that to actually pare back governance to the fundamentals, always have these questions front of mind. What to know, and that includes committee members, what to do, and particularly what we should be doing collectively or collaboratively within our OC community, what to achieve, what's our purpose, what do we want to improve or change specifically. And that should drive everything. And as I said, simple things such as committee meetings being organised around the goals and a strategic plan, that is so simple. And yet the consequences are so significant. It changes everything. We're no longer being reactive, we're being proactive, and we're being focused on future improvements. And importantly, what we can achieve together within a committee, but also in partnership with lot owners and the manager.
And can I say, Nick, that is the big outcome, the big winner of all that is a cohesive and happy community, because they've all been involved, rather than, as you say, all the infighting. And that's what happens when people aren't consulted, aren't brought on the journey, you know, and don't have input into
Indeed,
it. So,
indeed.
so
And we call
it's
that
definitely,
yeah.
you know, there's a huge win of doing that kind of work. Geeta's shared with us, conflicts is tied with ethical behaviour, and many OCs / committees / managers have limited understanding and governance, as this has broad implications for the whole entity. Acting in the best interests of all parties means little when owners or committees don't understand governance, i.e. because they've got limited experience and exposure, and perhaps a vodcast next year on this will be very helpful. She agrees with both Nicholas and Catherine's comments on governance. So thank you, Geeta, for your comments there. And yes, you know, we always like to explore and take this topic further, and we can certainly put that on our list for next year. Incredibly, as I said at the start, that our conversation, you know, has already taken our time, and maybe next year we should look at stretching it to maybe 45 minutes. I don't know. What does our audience feel about that?
It goes so fast.
It does go so fast. It's just, yeah. It's 45 to an hour would be great. So maybe we could think about that for next year. And definitely, and are there some topics, if you want to throw in while we still have you, if there are some particular topics that you would like us to focus on, we can certainly look at some. As I said, it's mainly contemporary issues and human factors, you know, the how-to, trying to solve that and give guidance around how to simply move forward on something, or how to tackle, you know, difficult problems and chunk it down. And the range of experience of our panel is enormous, can I say. So we've got 1 hour, please. And maybe with a bit of extra time built in, we could then have some open mic dialogue as well, which would be quite good as well in the future. Would be great. And I see that we have co-housing joining us, so we could certainly bring in a conversation around that, because I will share this with you. I was involved with helping Carol out with one of her clients yesterday, and my goodness, after spending some time unpacking all the problems there, it really was just, you know, not getting on, like not understanding, not getting on with people, that no shared vision kind of topic. And it just made me feel there's got to be a better way of making decisions than the way this was all going to pan out, which was through Nick's, you know, comment about the AGM and the business meeting not being a place that things can be discussed, and because that's exactly what happened. It was just all motions, bang, 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 and of course, you know, wasn't the best outcome as a result of the way it went through. And it did make me think of you know, that different way of decision making and better kind of governance. So I think, yes, we'll unpack something more next year. But on that note, I'd like to thank you, our panel in particular, for your contributions this year. It's been fantastic. To all our lot owners and managers who tune in on a regular basis. Of course, quite a lot of you listen to it as a download after the event. We thank you for participating as well and dialing in. And a big thank you to our S3E8 team, who sits in the background and does our hosting there. And from all of us, I'd like to wish you a safe and fun silly season as we go down that. Keep safe, celebrate safe, of course, and all the best for the New Year celebration.
And a big thank you to you, Julie, for organising all this and
Indeed.
wrangling us every month, because we wouldn't do it without you. So your commitment